Hey, welcome to day 34 of our chronological Bible study where we're going through the Bible in a year using the Tara-Leigh Cobble Bible Recap Study Plan. As I mentioned, we're on day 34. I've been a little behind on my videos. We have had some family problems. We had a death in our family, and so understandably, I've kind of been behind, but I wanted to go ahead and try to backtrack and do as many videos as I could because there is so much good things that have been in these last few chapters. And I mean, we're almost done with Exodus, not today on day 34, but today on the day that I'm actually recording this. It has been so amazing. So I just wanted to make sure that we backtrack, and everything that I have learned, I kind of wanted to share because it's been pretty amazing. This would be the second full time that I have read Exodus, and none of this stood out to me before. And that's why the word is so amazing, that because of things that you have read in the past, it kind of refocuses the way that you read a scripture, and I mean and I think that's kind of why it's active and breathing, and depends on what time of life you're in. Anyway, so we'll just start. So chapter 13, it's where it's the consecration of the firstborn, and this is really to, like, the firstborn. We have read all through Genesis how important the firstborn was to this group of people, and so the Lord wanted to make sure that that was not going to be an idol for them, in a sense, because everything that they did for that firstborn, like, they would have been raised in a certain way. They would have been, thought of in a certain way because they were going to inherit everything and be the leader of that family. And so the thought is for us to think about, like, what do we treat as our firstborn? What do we put such a high importance on? Maybe it's our marriage, maybe it's our children, maybe it's our job. We have to think about what things that we treat in that way. And the Lord is saying, this is mine. The consecration of their firstborn, the most important thing to them, this is mine. You're going to consecrate that to me. And so God requires what they valued to be his, and he redeemed it for himself. And so it's set apart, it's dedicated to him, not to you, not to the child, but to him. And so I just thought that was pretty amazing. And then we go to, in verse 8 of chapter 13, it says, "You shall tell your son on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt." We have to tell our children what the Lord has done for us, because they weren't there. They didn't get to experience, like, they see you where you are now. They see maybe you're more healed than you, obviously, hopefully you are more healed than you were, or the way your life is now doesn't look the way that it did. Maybe you have been able, through the Holy Spirit, to change the direction of your life. We have got to tell our children these things so that, I mean, it's like they see, one of the simple ways to put it is, like, they see where you live now, and they didn't see the shack that you grew up in, or what it took for you to get to this stage. And it's very important for us to share those things with them. And then it says in verse 9, "And it shall be to you as a sign on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth." Did that make you think of anything? Maybe the mark of the beast? Everything that I have learned over the last 2 years is the fact that it's not a literal mark. It is what we think and what we do out of our thoughts. And in this, they even add "be in your mouth." So what comes out of your mouth. And so it is what you do with your hands and what you're devoted to in your mind. What you're devoted to in your mind comes out in your deeds. And so my thought and everything, all the commentary that I have studied, it's not a literal mark. In Revelation, it talks about the mark of the beast, but it often gets looked over that there's a mark of God's people as well. And so it's literally, are we, the thoughts, the things that we think and do, are they for God or are they for Satan? And so I just thought that that was very interesting. I did not see that last time. All right. And then we kind of get, in verse 17, it's kind of like back to the story, like we kind of got left on I don't know what you would got. My brain stopped working for a second, but like on a cliffhanger, and then it was kind of like skirt. And then we go, to a different story. Now we're going back where we're talking about the pillar of cloud and fire. And it talks about it in verse 17. It says, when Pharaoh let you go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, which is amazing because Philistines were known to be really good fighters. Well, this was a brand new nation of slaves. They had not had to provide for themselves, much less defend themselves. So God was leading them in a different way so that they would not be, in the next verse, it says, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. He already knew that they were chicken. I mean, I would have been too. So, I don't know what I'm saying. But God, he already knew that, and he already kind of knew how fickle they were, right? And then it talks about in verse 18, but God led the people around by the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea. And the people of Israel went up and out of Egypt equipped for battle. And so somehow they had, I was fixing to say ammunition. They did not have ammunition. They probably had swords and arrows and that kind of bows and arrows, or, whatever it would have been, what fighting material they would have had at that time. They had that, but they didn't know how to use it. And so the Lord allowed them to go around until they're going to fight. They're going to fight the Amalekites, but by that time, they're going to kind of know how to use the weapons. And here we see in chapter 14, they are crossing the Red Sea. And let's see. And then in verse 13, the people are scared. And it says, fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians who you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still, be silent. A lot of times we can read that and it's kind of like, the Lord will fight all my battles. The Lord will fight all my battles. Well, and it's not that that's not true, but that doesn't mean that there's no action that's required on our end. What I hear here is Moses he answers their fear, but he kind of tells them, just shut up. It's just kind of like, be silent. Just stop talking. Stop worrying. Stop complaining. Stop talking about it, because that perpetuates the fear. That's kind of the way that I get that. And then, let's see, we go to chapter 15. So the Lord rescues them. He gets them on the other side of the Red Sea, and the people are celebrating. Miriam, his sister, begins singing and dancing with a tambourine on the shoreline and all that kind of thing. And in verse 15, it says, who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glorious deeds, doing wonders? More or less saying, no one, none of the little g gods are as good as you. He has proven that to them. And then it talks about in verses 14 through 16, like, you parted the Red Sea and you will make them all fear us. And something to note here is that Moses wrote all of this down as they were entering the promised land, like knowing that he was not going to be able to be with them whenever they got to the promised land. And so because of that, he wanted to make sure to give them a reminder of the things that was done, that they did. And it made me think about in Psalm 77 verses, like the whole thing, but in verses 19 through 20, it specifically talks about how your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters, yet your footsteps were unseen. They knew he was there, but they didn't see him. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. And they are remembering the good things that God did for them, how he delivered them. But Moses wanted to make sure that he knew these things because they were fixing to face some really hard times. And because they were led out of Egypt in these 40 years, the Lord was really making himself known and trying to change them to look more like him and trying to get Egypt out of them. But now they're going into the land of Canaan where they look very similar to the Egyptians. And so he wanted to write all these things down to let them know, okay, hey, remember these things. All right, and then at the end of chapter 15, there's a lot here. So it was the bitter water made sweet. And we see that God led them into the wilderness. The water was bitter, or there was no water to be found. When they came to Mara, which means bitter, they were grumbling and crying and saying, just complaining about the whole thing and scared. I mean, they're scared, right? Understandably. Well, Moses takes a log and throws it into the water and it becomes sweet. Well, as far as the chemistry of that, we don't know. And we just have to hold that with an open hand that, Lord, I understand your ways are better than mine. Some people have to question, and that's where you just kind of got to do that with the Lord. But accepting what it is and what it means. All right, so in the latter part of verse 25, it says, there the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them, saying, if you will diligently listen to my voice, to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his eyes, and give ear to his command, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer. He is telling them, he knows that they're probably terrified because they see what all he did to the Egyptians, and they're scared that he's going to do it to them too. And he's telling them, look, I'm not going to do that to you. I'm not. I need you to listen to the things that I'm telling you and obey. Listen and obey. And this will never happen to you. And so some of the key things here is that God led them into the wilderness where there was bitterness. He led them into bitterness, which was Mara, right? Mara means bitterness. And in their obedience, there is safety, right? In their obedience, the Lord is telling them, in your obedience, this will not happen to you. It's not about punishment, right? He doesn't list their punishment if you don't listen to me. He's just telling them there is goodness if you listen to me. And so the thought is that God is not opposed to exposing us to the bitter, so we will better recognize the sweet when it comes. That is a quote by Jen Wilkin. And when I tell you, that really changed the way that I looked at this passage. And he's just telling, listen to me, do what I tell you, have an ear for what I'm telling you, and do it. Keep these commands, which will be given shortly. And keep in mind, this was only a month after Passover. So I know it feels like a whole lot of time has went by, but this is only about 30 days since they've been delivered. And so we can't expect them to be freed from slavery and then all of a sudden perfectly obey. And I feel like that's our story too, that just because we're so hard on ourselves that we can't get it right when, our old self's not that far in our rear view. The Lord is patient with us. He's giving us all the instruction that we need, but he's patient with us to get to the place that he needs us to. And sometimes that is him leading us into a place of bitterness so that we will see that it's not bitter so much as it's better for us. All right, and then verse 27, it says, then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped where there was water. All right, so 12 springs, 70 palm trees. We know that Moses is super concerned about numbers. All right, 12. We know that is a complete number like for the tribes, right? Like that's the number of the tribes. So that lets them know there was a spring for every tribe that was there. There was 70 palm trees. 70 means perfection. This means that there was perfect provision for them, for every single person, for every tribe that went in, the perfect number that went in, there was perfect provision for them. And the thing to think about with numbers is that they were a memory tool. You know, we take for granted that we have this whole word that we can sit here and read and keep, like if we forget something, we can refer back to it. But they didn't have that. And so numbers were used as a memory tool for them to help. The repetition of the numbers helped for them to keep things in their mind. This was a long video, but there was so much, and there's so much more that we could go over, but I wanted to make sure that that last part, that was very important to me. And we will be back tomorrow for day 35. Have a good one.